All right, everyone, how's it going here? Today we're gonna be going through Final Cut Pro, just some basics on it. And just to be full disclosure here, I'm not gonna go into super technical terms or things like that within this tutorial. I'm trying to gear this towards the very basic understanding and for people who may have never even opened up a video editor before. So if I maybe name things a little different or I'm not quite explaining it on the most technical level, I do apologize, but I'm aiming for this to be for beginner level. We've never even looked at video editing before. So let's go ahead, let's get started. Just so everyone's on the same page, I am currently working on this M1 Mac. It's a Mac Mini. As you see, it's 16 gigabyte. It's a great computer, but that's what I'm working on right now. So, and this should be universal for any current Mac program or Mac computer. So we'll just go ahead here and we'll open up Final Cut. And just to show you guys, so this is Final Cut version 10.6, and again, what I'm going over, it shouldn't really matter what version you're on. Most of it's pretty universal, but just so we're on the same page, this is currently 10.6, which is not the latest. Haven't updated yet because supposedly the latest has some bugs they're working out, so that's where we're at. So anyway, this is what we're seeing here on a single screen anyway. I'm working on a widescreen LG monitor, so it looks a little more stretched out than your typical monitor, which that's how I kind of like it for Final Cut. I typically do work with two windows, and that's something you can totally do. But right now, yeah, it's working in the one window here, so we can see everything. So this whole area here is Final Cut. Now let's kind of go over the different areas here. So up first, over here, this is our main tab area where we're going to have our project that's currently it's called Untitled because we haven't created anything yet. So Final Cut defaults to Untitled. So you have your project here, and that's what these little four squares indicate. And then you have your folders that you can organize everything in, or your events. So your smart collections is based off of key terms or different things like that you would label it so that Final Cut just automatically does it. I don't really use it, so if I'm not explaining it well, I apologize. But I wouldn't really worry about smart collections. What I would be concerned about is events. And so with the events, it always opens up with the current date. So of course that today is the 11th of May. But what you need to do is you can just right click in here. And you can create new events, and then you can create as many events as you want. Now, your events are for organization purposes. So whenever I create this, all of our media and everything is going to live in this event, and we're actually gonna see it over here where we see this import media. So I always like to organize my events. I always create like an edits and old edits for stuff that I might come back to, but I've moved on from that current phase of the edit, as well as sorting all of my footage. I don't do a lot of keywords or anything like that because I have kind of a unique situation where I can kind of remember where a lot of stuff's at. So to me, whenever we're editing and things like that, it's not a big deal to me to go back and find the shot that I'm looking for. So I skip the step of keywording everything out. Now, certainly on bigger projects and things like that, I would probably put in some keywords, but a lot of times I don't. So it's not something I really use, and that's where your smart collections and things would come in handy. This area here is where all your footage, your edits, and everything is going to live, and they're all going to appear right here on this area, and we'll get to that in a minute. So this area shows everything that you're editing and you're playing down here. You have a bunch of different tools and things like that you incorporate while you're looking at that. Over here is, they call this the inspector window, and you can turn that on and off. It's not as important, but it's definitely got some great tools in there and how you can kind of move things around and keyframe and work with your audio and different things like that. It's definitely important, but a lot of times throughout your edit, you're gonna just have that closed anyway. And you can also hide your other windows here too. You can hide your browser over there just by clicking on that button, and now all what you see is your screen. So a few different things like that depending on how you like to edit. Up here as well, if you do use two monitors, you can click on this and move your viewer over to the second display. That's how I like to edit. So mainly over on one screen, I'm only seeing my timeline. The other screen, I'm seeing the viewer. So you can totally customize it however you want. And if you're only working off a laptop with one screen, then this is how you're gonna look at it. Down here is where your timeline lives. And then over here in this window is where we have our effects. Now we can turn that on and off again too, but this is where you're gonna have all your different effects that you can work with to add, whether it's color grading, your audio, different things like that. It's all gonna live here. And then also if you click on this, this is where your transitions live. So just right up above over here, this little triangle thing is what your transition browser is, where you can add on to the end of the clips. And then this doesn't always pop up here, but this is for your audio levels. A lot of times it defaults for me that it's gonna start right there, but if you double click here too, that disappears. So you can just have your audio up here. Not too concerned about audio at the moment, just to hide that and get a little extra space. So that's kind of the basics as far as what we see everything here within Final Cut. So let's start diving a little deeper. Let's go ahead and let's import a project. So first off, what we can do is we can go ahead and go to File and do new library. So that's the one thing that part of what I kind of always get mixed up is, and I try to say it, but it's a library is what you create within Final Cut when you're editing. It's not a project. A project is something different. The project is the edit that you're doing, whereas the library is everything is living there in a library. All your media, all your assets, all the edits, everything lives in a Final Cut library. So we can go ahead and we can click on Have Library. I'm gonna leave it here with the Untitled, but you just simply open that up, tell it where you wanna save it to, which I always recommend editing off SSDs, but you can certainly edit off of the main computer as well. And then that'll open up and you'll see what we have here. So the next is the import stage. So a couple different ways you can do that. You can click on an event and then click Import Media, or you can go up to File and click Import, or Command I as well. Whatever option you choose to do, it's gonna open up a new window. This is your importing window. So what you're going to see here is cameras. That's mainly gonna be like if you have an extra SSD plugged in and it's being recognized that that's a camera file on the SD card, it'll pop up there and you'll see that. Otherwise, you'll see different things like your hard drives and things like that. So it just totally depends on where your footage lives. Over here is just simply what you're looking at. So as I click on like desktop, I can see everything in there that's on my desktop. Over here, this is where this kind of starts getting important here. So we have the events. This is where you can tell it to import to a certain event. So we have the dated event as well as the edits event, or you can create a new one. So if you want to do a little bit of organization in advance, you can do that. Depends on the project and what I'm doing, but a lot of times I organize after I import. So a lot of times I just say import it all and then I'll figure it out from there. With the files, there's two different ways that Final Cut can organize your footage. Either you can bring everything into the library itself so that the library is going to be a massive file. It could be a couple of gigabytes, terabytes, depending on what you're working with. Or you can tell Final Cut, I want you to leave everything where I have it at and just point to it. So what I mean by that is if you have all the footage on 3 different hard drives and you're working with like 5 terabytes, what you're probably going to want to do then is to leave it in place and just have those hard drives plugged in, because your library then won't balloon up to 5 terabytes. Instead, it'll just simply get the metadata and be like, okay, well, this footage is here, this footage is there, and that footage is there. And it'll point to it in the library and you'll be able to work with it, but it's working off of the other SSDs and it's not bringing it over to your Final Cut library itself. As far as the keywords, I never really touch those, but the keywords are basically the different things that are already, if you organize your footage before you import it, all the more organization that I do is simply tell it what camera it came from, and that will then help out quite a lot, because then that will add that metadata in there. The next area that we're gonna look at is this analyze video. I ignore that, just completely ignore it. It sounds like it's a good idea, where you can tell it to find people and to put them in smart collections or balance the color automatically. Isn't that great? It's not that great. So I would just avoid that. It's just going to probably cause more troubles than anything. I would avoid it. The one thing I do definitely recommend though now is down to this next one, Transcode. So what that means is that it's going to rewrite the files into something more workable in Final Cut. Now, if you have an older machine, a slower machine, and it's really struggling with stuff, you should create Proxy Media. And proxies are It's taking your video and chopping it down to a lower quality. It's not destroying your media that you currently have. Keep that in mind. We're non-linear editing, so therefore nothing is getting destroyed. We can restore the original. But what it's simply doing is it's making it a file that your computer can handle better. So a lot of times on my laptop, I need to switch to Proxy Mode because I have an older laptop. It's a 2017. It can't keep up with the latest footage that's out there now. So I'll switch to Proxy Mode though, then I can edit just fine. You don't want to be doing certain things like color grading and things like that in Proxy Mode, but you can do probably about 90% of your work in Proxy and it'll be fine. Creating the optimized media, the only time you really want to do that is if you're working with a footage that Final Cut just simply cannot handle and you need to have it at the highest quality possible while you're working with it. So it's not something that I definitely recommend, but it basically turns it into, I believe it's ProRes, and it just turns things into huge files. So I never really have a need to do it, and I don't think for most people you would need to. I think that's more on a higher level why you'd be wanting to optimize your media. As far as the codec, you have your Proxy ProRes or the H.264 when you create your proxies. Again, I haven't seen a big difference. ProRes is the native to Final Cut, so that's what I would recommend, but I've done both. I don't really see a difference. And then the frame size, that's just how much it's cutting down. The lower the percentage, the lesser quality it's going to be. 25% seems to be pretty good for me most of the time, but you can go down, I believe, to like 12%. Finally, down here in this last box, you have Analyze Audio. The only one that I would recommend if you wanted to do just to kind of eliminate part of the headache is remove silent channels, because sometimes those can be hidden, and if they're silent anyway, why have them in your workflow? But otherwise, most of the other ones I wouldn't worry about and wouldn't check. Same thing with assign audio roles. I would just leave it as do it automatically. If you really get into doing audio corrections and stuff like that, you can organize everything, but again, for most people, I don't recommend that. All right, so let's go ahead, let's find our stuff. So I imported just some drone footage on the desktop. So I'll just click on this footage folder and there we go. We have several clips. So I'm just gonna select them all. But the one thing that is kind of cool too within Final Cut is that you can just select one on this import window, and then you see here you can kind of browse through and see what you're looking at. So I was up in Duluth during the winter time and got some cool shots of the little ice formations happening on Lake Superior. All right, so what we're going to do is we're gonna go ahead and import some footage then. So I'm just gonna go here, I have my 4 clips, I'm gonna select them all, and then I am going to just hit import all. And you do have this window here that says close window after importing. You can leave it open if you have more stuff to import, or you just say, yep, close everything up. So I'll hit import and it disappears. So now Final Cut is going ahead, it's working with the footage, it's trying to create something with it, and we can instantly start looking at it. Now you'll see here in your browser, you have a couple different ways to view the footage. This is the film strip layout, and this is the default to Final Cut. Some people like this because you're looking at the individual clips. As you see here, this is max 007, or 0007, and so you can kind of just scrub all the way through it right here and see where it's at and grab what you want. I don't like this way. What I prefer to do is if I click this here, I prefer just to see the name of it, and then in the browser here, it's gonna give me that same kind of strip here that I can scrub through. What I mainly like to do is I like to click and drag across and create a range and then import that into my project. I just find that to be super simple, or I'll just simply grab all the clips and throw them into my project and start chopping from there. So before we get into that though, let's go ahead and we are going to create our project. Over here, I created this event that I called edits. So I always have an event set up there so that that's where my edits are going to live. So then I'm just going to go to File, New, it's Projects, so you do Project. This is where you tell it now, okay, what are we working with? So I'm just going to call this drone footage, and it's going to live in the event that's called edits. The starting time code, I'm always going to leave it at 0. I never have a need to change that. The video format, so the footage that I have, I shot in 4K. But I can create any type of format that I want for it, as you can see. So a lot of times what I do, especially if I'm producing for the web, is I'll shoot in 4K, but I'll produce it in 1080. So we'll do 1080, the frame rate. We can talk about frame rates another time, but for the basic frame rates, you're gonna probably be looking at 23.98. That's the standard here in the United States, so we'll leave that. The rendering is ProRes, that's fine. You don't need to touch that. And there's nothing else to touch. So we're just gonna go ahead and hit OK. So now I have here, you see the little clapper. Now this is my edit that I can start working with. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna go through and just kind of grab a range. So I'm gonna see here, kind of like how this starts taking off. So I'm gonna drop that, and I'm just gonna grab that, and then I'm gonna drop that in. A couple of different ways you can do it. You can click with, when you have the hand, and drag it down. Command Z to undo that. You can use Q, and it sets it on top. So if you have, say, a talking head right down here, you notice that now there's a black spot, and then there's the footage on top. So if you had something underneath here that you wanted to keep, but you wanted to throw some footage on top of it, like if you have a talking head here and then you wanted to show something while that talking head is still going, you'd use Q to bring that in. You have W, which just inserts it right in the middle wherever you have this red bar at on your timeline. You hit W, it's gonna drop it in right there. It'll split between clips, it'll do everything like that. Or finally, you could just hit E, which just adds it to the end of your timeline. A couple different ways that you can do it, and you can explore with that, what's gonna work best for you depending on what edit you're doing. Now we have this in our timeline down here, so let's just go ahead and let's grab a few other ones here. So now we have everything into our timeline, and we can really start editing now. Down here, you'll notice a couple different things. We have our clips in order that we put them in, and you see that they're labeled by name, and you can kind of change some of this stuff if you want, but they're labeled by name. But if we click on them too, you can see that they're still all individually different, and we can do a lot of different things with them from that. So I'm gonna go ahead and hit play. And you see it's stuttering a little bit. That's because this footage is struggling a little bit on this computer. And you see here too that we have all these little dotted lines right up here. What that means is that, hey, the footage needs to be rendered out. So the computer is right now just kind of generating the footage for us, but if we render it out, then it will play back a little smoother. Your computer may slow down if you see that. So as you can see, just simple footage kind of buzzing by. A little long, but you know, it's working. All right, so there you have it, guys. That's how you kind of get a project started in Final Cut. Now we're gonna go in more detail here. We've got a lot more tutorials we're gonna be building from. This is just the basics of how to at least get started. So let me know in the comments below if you have any questions or any thoughts on what you're hoping to have answered within Final Cut, and we'll do the best we can to get to those. And otherwise, stay tuned for more Final Cut tutorials.